Tonight, the first topic we explore is the life and ideas of Albert Einstein, perhaps the most iconic physicist in modern history. A man whose wild hair and deep eyes became symbols of genius itself. From redefining our understanding of space and time to his quiet resistance against war and injustice, Einstein's life was filled with curiosity, rebellion, and moments of deep reflection. So before you get comfortable, as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if you enjoy our content. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories are too interesting, and we're working on some boring ones. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight, together. Albert Einstein was born on a quiet spring day, March 14, 1879, in the small German city of Ulm. He was not born into grandeur or wealth, but into the hum of ordinary life. His father, Hermann, was an engineer, and his mother, Pauline, was a gifted pianist. Their home was filled with a gentle mix of tools and melodies, science and art, an atmosphere that would quietly shape the boy who would one day change how we understand the universe. From the very beginning, Albert was different. Not in the way people might expect genius to show itself. He was slow to speak. Some in his family feared he never would. He often repeated sentences softly to himself under his breath, as if trying to make sense of the words before releasing them into the world. But what he lacked in speech, he made up for in stillness, an intense, quiet curiosity that seemed to absorb everything around him. One day, when he was about 5 years old and homesick in bed, his father gave him a simple gift to cheer him up, a pocket compass. Just a tiny object, with a small needle suspended in a glass case. But for Albert, it was a moment of revelation. He held the compass in his small hand, tilted it, turned it, studied it. No matter what he did, the needle moved, always pointing north. Something invisible was moving it. Something he couldn't see or touch or hear, but something that was there. He became obsessed. How could the needle know which way was north? What force could reach across space and command it like that? The mystery burrowed into his young mind and never left. Later, Einstein would call this his first wonder, the moment he realized that the universe had laws, patterns, secrets, and he wanted to spend his life uncovering them. That compass didn't just point north, it pointed forward. It was the beginning of a journey that would carry Einstein across continents, through revolutions in thought, and into the minds of generations to come. Long before chalkboards and equations, it all began with a boy, a fever, and a tiny needle dancing in still air. Albert Einstein's early school years were anything but brilliant. In fact, if you had been one of his teachers, you might never have guessed you were looking at a future icon of genius. He didn't behave poorly, but he didn't exactly follow the rules either. He didn't sit up straight with excitement. He didn't memorize the answers like the others. What he did, often quietly, inwardly, was think. He would let his mind wander. And in classrooms where conformity was king, that made him a misfit. In late 19th century Germany, the school system was strict, even militaristic. Lessons were rigid. Students recited by rote. Creativity was not rewarded. It was discouraged. But Albert was not interested in memorizing what others had already discovered. He wanted to understand the why. Why did light behave the way it did? Why was the sky blue? Why did time feel slower when you were bored and faster when you were playing? These weren't questions that earned you gold stars. They earned you raised eyebrows. His teachers, frustrated with his questions and quiet resistance, often saw him as defiant. One famously told him he would never amount to anything. Another asked him to leave school altogether. But at home, Einstein was a different student. He devoured books on his own. Books about physics, mathematics, and philosophy. He discovered Euclidean geometry before most of his classmates even heard the word theorem. At the age of 12, he began teaching himself algebra and calculus, not for grades, not for praise, just for the sheer joy of unraveling the universe. He also found peace in music. His mother, Pauline, had introduced him to the violin early on. At first, he resisted it, but as he grew older, music became a refuge. He loved Mozart most of all. Playing the violin calmed him, gave him rhythm when the world felt chaotic. He once said that if he hadn't been a physicist, he might have become a musician. So while the classroom tried to box him in, Albert quietly made his own world. A world filled with questions, symbols, silence, and sound. He wasn't failing. He was just waiting for the right kind of challenge. And soon, it would arrive. By the time Albert Einstein finished his studies at the Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, he had the knowledge, but not the path. The world didn't seem to know what to do with him. He graduated without distinction, without glowing letters of recommendation. His professors didn't quite know how to categorize him. He was brilliant, yes, but unconventional, stubborn, and always questioning. He applied for teaching positions across Europe, rejected, again and again. At times, it seemed as though no one wanted him. For over 2 years, Einstein drifted in what he later called his wasted years. But they weren't wasted, not really. They were the quiet before the storm, the waiting period before genius would be ready to speak. Eventually, a friend helped him secure a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. Not as a physicist, not even as a teacher. He was a clerk. He reviewed patent applications for electromagnetic devices and small mechanical inventions. It was far from glamorous, but it was stable, and more importantly, it was quiet. That silence gave him space. While others saw a dull government job, Einstein saw opportunity. The work was mechanical and repetitive, but that left his mind free. He used scraps of paper and the backs of applications to scribble ideas. He took long walks along the Aar River, thinking through puzzles most people never even asked. And late at night, after returning to his modest apartment, he'd continue to dream. No laboratory, no team, just Albert, his thoughts, and the ticking clock. During this time, he also fell in love with Mileva Maric, a fellow physics student from Zurich. Their relationship was passionate, but complicated. They would eventually marry, and their union would bear children, but also deep strain. Einstein was still searching for himself, still becoming who he would one day be, and marriage, for all its comfort, added new pressures. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Albert's obsession with light. He imagined riding on a beam of light, wondering what the world would look like from that impossible perspective. That single thought, born in obscurity, shaped during his lonely patent office years, would soon unlock one of the greatest revolutions in human thought. The world didn't see him yet, but he was almost ready. The year was 1905. Albert Einstein was 26 years old, working full-time at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. By day, he reviewed designs for inventions. By night, he turned to the questions that haunted him. And that year, quietly, without fanfare, he rewrote the laws of physics. Historians call it his annus mirabilis, his miracle year. In the span of just 12 months, Einstein published 4 scientific papers. Not forgettable footnotes, not minor tweaks. Each paper fundamentally altered how we understand reality. The first paper explained the photoelectric effect. It showed that light wasn't just a wave, it could act like a particle too. This was the beginning of quantum theory, a strange and radical field that would later unsettle even Einstein himself. His ideas helped others eventually develop technologies like solar panels, lasers, and even the foundations of modern computing. The second paper confirmed the existence of atoms. At the time, atoms were still considered theoretical. Many scientists weren't even convinced they were real. But Einstein, through statistical calculations, showed how their motion could explain the behavior of particles suspended in liquid. Suddenly, the invisible world of atoms had a doorway, and Albert had opened it. The third paper was about special relativity. In it, Einstein proposed something astonishing, that space and time are not fixed. They bend, they stretch, They change depending on how fast you're moving. Imagine two people, one standing still and one speeding through space. Their clocks would tick at different rates. The faster you move, the slower time becomes. Reality, it seemed, was more fluid than anyone had dared to think. And then came the fourth paper, just a few pages long, a quiet bombshell. In it, he introduced a simple formula, E-mc2. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That one equation showed that matter and energy were interchangeable. A single drop of mass held unimaginable energy, a principle that would later power stars, fuel nuclear energy, and awaken terrifying possibilities. And all of this, from a man with no university position, no laboratory, and no assistant. Just a pen, a desk, and a relentless imagination. The scientific world barely knew what had hit it. But in that modest little office, a revolution had begun. And nothing would ever be the same again. In 1919, the world changed for Albert Einstein. Not because of a new discovery, but because the world finally saw what he had already revealed. That year, British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington led an expedition to observe a solar eclipse. During the eclipse, stars that passed near the sun appeared to shift their positions ever so slightly. The bending of light around a massive object, just as Einstein's theory of general relativity had predicted. The newspapers seized it with both hands. One headline shouted, "Lights all askew in the heavens." Overnight, Einstein went from an obscure patent clerk turned physicist to a household name. Not just in Germany, not just in scientific circles, everywhere. He became the first global celebrity of science. Reporters followed him. Crowds gathered at his lectures. His face appeared in magazines and newspapers, often paired with the mysterious formula E-mc2, even if most people didn't quite understand what it meant. But fame was never what Einstein wanted. He found it odd, exhausting even. Strangers stopped him in the street. Letters poured in by the hundreds, questions, compliments, theories, and pleas. He was amused by it, but also overwhelmed. He once said that being a celebrity made him feel like an exotic animal in a zoo. Beneath the public spotlight, Einstein remained who he had always been, an introvert, a thinker, a wanderer of ideas. While people gathered to hear him speak, he preferred walking alone or playing his violin in a quiet room. He loved to sail, even though he wasn't very good at it. The water, like the universe, gave him space to drift. In private, he continued to work tirelessly. He was still chasing the deepest truths of reality, still asking questions no one else dared to ask. But now, there were distractions, ceremonies, honors, and obligations. The world wanted more from him than just science. They wanted a voice, a leader, a symbol. Einstein obliged, to a point. But deep down, he missed the obscurity of Bern, the stillness of the patent office, the purity of thought untouched by fame. In many ways, the loner who had imagined riding on a beam of light now lived under a spotlight too bright for comfort. And yet, through it all, his mind never stopped asking, why? As the world marched toward chaos in the early 20th century, Albert Einstein stood apart, not just as a scientist, but as a voice of conscience. The horrors of World War I deeply disturbed him. The glorification of violence, the blind loyalty to flags, the endless rows of young men sent to die. It was all senseless to him. He was not just against war, he was broken by it. While many German intellectuals signed declarations supporting the war, Einstein refused. He co-authored a counter-manifesto, though it went largely ignored. It didn't matter. He believed that silence in the face of violence was a form of betrayal, and from then on, he spoke more openly about the need for peace, understanding, and global cooperation. After the war, Einstein's beliefs began to evolve even further. He became increasingly engaged with political issues, not because he sought power, but because he couldn't bear to watch humanity destroy itself. He saw nationalism as a poison. Racism, inequality, and militarism disturbed him deeply. He began to speak out for pacifism, Zionism, and civil rights, ideas that made him both admired and hated. And then came the rise of Adolf Hitler. As anti-Semitism spread like wildfire through Germany, Einstein knew he had to leave. His home, his country, his reputation, none of it was safe. In 1933, he renounced his German citizenship and accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. There, in quiet exile, he would spend the rest of his life. But peace didn't follow him. Across the ocean, the Nazi regime was growing bolder, and the threat of a terrible weapon, a bomb powered by the very equation Einstein had uncovered, loomed on the horizon. In 1939, Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In it, he warned that Germany might be developing a nuclear weapon. He urged the US to begin its own research. That letter helped initiate the Manhattan Project, the race to build the atomic bomb. Though Einstein did not work on the bomb itself, he carried the guilt of that letter for the rest of his life. His warning had come from fear, not ambition. And when he saw what that fear had unleashed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, his heart grew heavy. He had unlocked energy from matter, but he could not control how the world used it. By the time Albert Einstein settled into his new life in Princeton, New Jersey, he was no longer just a scientist. He had become a symbol. To many, he represented the very spirit of free thought, of reason in the face of chaos. And yet, in exile, Einstein sought something much simpler: quiet. He moved into a modest home on a tree-lined street where he would live for the rest of his life. The neighbours often saw him walking alone, hands behind his back, his hair wild in the wind. He didn't own socks. He disliked fame. And he welcomed visitors only when the visits were sincere. In Princeton, he found space, not only to think, but to breathe. At the Institute for Advanced Study, Einstein continued to work on what he called the unified field theory. His goal was almost spiritual in nature, to find a single, elegant equation that could explain all the fundamental forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, and beyond. He believed the universe was not random, but ordered. There had to be a pattern, a symmetry, a deeper code beneath the surface. But the answer always danced just out of reach. While quantum physicists were busy embracing uncertainty and probability, Einstein resisted. "God does not play dice with the universe," he famously said. He didn't mean religion in a traditional sense. For him, God was more like the harmony of natural laws, the perfect logic of the cosmos. He could not accept that the universe was ruled by randomness. He wanted a universe that made sense. Outside of physics, he continued to speak up. He became an outspoken critic of racism in America, comparing it to the anti-Semitism he had fled in Europe. He supported civil rights leaders, condemned nuclear weapons, and refused to stay silent on matters of injustice. And yet, most of his days were spent in solitude, reading, scribbling equations, writing letters, listening to music, watching the seasons change from his study window. Some believed he had grown out of touch with modern science, but Einstein didn't mind. He was no longer chasing prestige or headlines. He was chasing beauty, truth, something deeper. In the quiet corridors of exile, he wasn't lost. He was still looking for the next mystery worth unraveling. Albert Einstein's final years were spent much like the rest of his life, in thought. He continued to rise early, take long walks, and fill page after page with calculations. His handwriting, still steady, curved across yellowed paper as he tried again and again to find the elusive theory that would unite the forces of nature. It didn't matter that younger physicists were moving in new directions. Einstein had made peace with walking alone. He often rejected fame, turning down honors, speaking invitations, even political power. In 1952, after the death of Israel's first president, Einstein was offered the presidency of the country. He respectfully declined, calling himself unfit for such responsibilities. "I deal with equations, not people," he said. He preferred quiet over power, clarity over control. At home in Princeton, he was known to the locals not as a genius, but as the gentle, strange old man who wandered the neighborhood, usually without socks, sometimes humming to himself. Children liked him. He would smile, offer them sweets, or ruffle their hair, and in return, they gave him the thing he valued most: freedom from questions. In private, Einstein's health began to fade. His heart was growing weak, but he refused surgery. He believed that life had a natural rhythm, and he would not interrupt it. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially," he once said. "I have done my share. It is time to go." On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein collapsed from internal bleeding caused by an aortic aneurysm. He was taken to the hospital where doctors offered treatment. He quietly refused. The next morning, April 18th, he passed away in his sleep. He left behind no grand farewell, no staged goodbye, just a stack of notes on his desk, scribbled equations from the night before. He had been working on his unified theory until the end, as if the universe might offer him one last glimpse of its secrets. His body was cremated in a private ceremony, and his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location. He had asked that no shrine be built, no grave to become a monument. He had always belonged to the cosmos, and in the end, he returned to it. The man who revealed the fabric of space and time slipped quietly back into it. Albert Einstein is gone, but his presence never really left. His ideas still ripple through time, quiet and profound, like echoes in a vast cosmic canyon. His name has become more than a name. It is a symbol whispered in classrooms, scribbled into textbooks, turned into jokes, questions, compliments, and even cartoons. But beneath the pop culture shadow lies something more meaningful. A man who never stopped asking why. He changed how we see the world, not just scientifically, but philosophically. Before Einstein, time was a steady drumbeat, space a static stage. After him, they became flexible, fluid, woven together into a fabric that could bend, twist, and ripple. He helped us understand that mass and energy were not different things, but different faces of the same truth. That reality could look different depending on how fast you moved or how closely you looked. But beyond the theories and formulas, Einstein taught us something quieter, something deeper, that it's okay not to have all the answers. That imagination has value, that the universe is not just made of particles and math, but also of wonder. The most beautiful experience, he once wrote, is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, wrestled with regrets, struggled in relationships. But in many ways, that made him more human, not less. He was not a cold genius in an ivory tower. He laughed, he loved, he doubted, he cared. He spoke for peace when others remained silent. He stood against injustice even when it cost him. And he never let the weight of fame silence his curiosity. Today, we continue to build on what he began. Satellites navigate using his equations. Nuclear energy pulses with his discoveries. Black holes curve space as he predicted. And far above us, in the silence of deep space, the light from distant galaxies still bends, just as he said it would. As you lay there tonight, listening to the quiet hum around you, know this: the universe is still expanding, still unfolding, still filled with questions. And somewhere, in the whisper of stars and the curve of time, the spirit of Einstein lingers, smiling, always curious, always wondering what comes next. Sleep well and keep asking why. Alas. It is dawn on August 24th, 79 AD. The sun rises slowly over Pompeii, washing the city in soft golden light. Shadows stretch across cobbled streets as shopkeepers unlatch their shutters and sweep yesterday's dust into the gutters. The distant sound of metal striking stone echoes through the forum. Blacksmiths already at work. Inside a bakery near the Temple of Apollo, the fire in the oven is stoked, and fresh loaves are arranged for sale. The smell of warm bread mixes with crushed olives, garlic, and the sharp bite of fermenting wine. In the stables, donkeys shuffle and bray, eager for water. In one of the wealthier villas, a mosaicist arranges coloured tiles on a half-finished floor, humming softly to himself. Pompeii is alive. Children splash each other at a public fountain. A fruit seller slices figs for a customer. 2 Roman soldiers, off-duty, lounge near a tavern door, drinking watered-down wine and laughing at the heat already rising from the stone. Overhead, laundry sways gently between buildings on long cords, dancing lazily in the morning breeze. But not everything is as it seems. Above them all, Mount Vesuvius stands tall, quiet, looming, ancient. This morning, thin white wisps rise faintly from its peak. They disappear quickly into the sky. To most, it's nothing. A curious cloud, a morning haze. Earthquakes had rattled the region days before, but nothing unusual. This land is known to move. The people of Pompeii live with the mountain. They trust it. They do not fear it. In a shaded garden, a young woman picks herbs, basil, mint, thyme. Her sandals crunch on gravel as she moves from bed to bed. She doesn't notice the silence above her. Birds have fled. The bees are gone. The air feels heavier, as if the sky is holding its breath. A slave in a nearby household glances up at the mountain, frowning. He senses something, but before he can dwell on it, he's called back inside. Water to fetch, floors to scrub, life to live. And so, Pompeii continues. The morning flows forward, as if the earth itself has not already begun to shift, as if time itself hasn't already decided to stop, by nightfall. The morning grows warmer. By 8:30 a.m. the sun is high over Pompeii, and the streets hum with movement. Shoppers haggle over dates and lentils in the bustling Macellum. The scent of fish and vinegar drifts through the air. Slaves haul buckets of water from public fountains. Children chase each other around columns. Everything feels ordinary. And yet, not quite. Something in the air has shifted. The ground gives a soft tremor beneath the feet. Not enough to knock anything over. Just enough to pause conversation. A moment of uncertainty. Then, like a breeze, the moment passes, and people go on. Earthquakes are common here. The mountain has always stirred. Still, the signs grow louder if one knows how to listen. At the Temple of Isis, the priestess stops mid-prayer. A jug on the altar rattles gently, almost imperceptibly. She narrows her eyes at the smoke rising from the incense. It swirls strangely, caught in a breeze that isn't there. She says nothing, but she feels something ancient shifting. In a courtyard garden near the city's edge, a dog whines and claws at the door. It's tied up, as always, but today it pulls harder. The woman of the house frowns at the ash on her steps. Ash? It must be from a neighbour's fire, she thinks. She brushes it away and continues with her day. By 10 past a.m. the tremors become more frequent. Small, rolling quakes every half hour. A crack forms in the side of a wall near the amphitheatre. No one sees it happen. A merchant blames the crack on age and time. But the time is now, and age is no longer the culprit. Up on Vesuvius, white vapour thickens into a dark grey column. It stretches upward, slow but constant. Faint rumbles echo down the slope. The goats have scattered. The air smells faintly of sulphur. By noon, ash begins to fall. Light, at first, like snowflakes, but warm to the touch. They land on rooftops, float into open jars, dust the shoulders of market-goers. Some stop and look up. They squint at the sun, which now glows through a thin veil of grey. The mountain is speaking. But Pompeii still isn't listening. It begins without warning. At exactly 12:02 p.m., the summit of Mount Vesuvius explodes. A thunderclap tears through the sky, so loud it shatters windows in Pompeii and is heard as far away as Misenum across the bay. The mountain doesn't just tremble, it opens. A plume of ash, pumice and rock shoots violently into the air, reaching nearly 20 kilometers high in a matter of minutes. The force turns daylight into dusk. From Pompeii's streets, it looks like the sky itself is breaking apart. At the Forum, people scream and scatter. Birds, what few remain, vanish into the blackening sky. Above them, the sun dims, casting an eerie bronze glow across the city. The column of ash climbs higher and higher, forming what Pliny the Younger would later call a pine tree of smoke. Thick at the base, branching at the top. Small rocks begin to rain down. Pumice, porous, sharp, and hot. They bounce off tiled roofs and sting exposed skin. At first, the hail is light, but it gains weight, it gains speed. Soon, the streets are covered in grey. Inside homes, people look to the gods. Some gather their families and rush toward the city gates. Others retreat deeper inside, believing the walls will protect them. One woman clutches her jewellery and rushes to the basement. A baker, covered in flour, grabs a sack of coins and locks the door behind him. But there is no safety. The ash begins to choke the air. People wrap cloth around their mouths. Their eyes sting. Their lungs tighten. The city's once bright marble becomes coated in soot. Statues of gods disappear under a falling sky. At the harbour, the sea pulls back unnaturally, then crashes back in violent waves. Ships rock and break from their moorings. Some attempt to flee by boat, but the winds whip wildly. Visibility fades. Water turns black. In the hills, a farmer watches in silence as the mountain roars and the heavens rain stone. Time begins to fracture. Minutes feel like hours. The rhythm of life, once measured by the clang of market stalls and temple bells, is replaced by coughing, screaming, and silence. Pompeii does not know it yet, but the countdown has begun. By 1:00 p.m., the city of Pompeii is unrecognizable. Ash falls like rain, thick and suffocating. The ground is hidden beneath a rising blanket of grey. Roofs begin to sag under the growing weight of pumice. The streets are no longer roads, they are rivers of dust and stone. Panic sets in. Citizens rush to the city gates. The Porta Marina, the Porta Nola, each one becomes a choke point as carts, animals and people collide in frantic waves. Horses rear and buck. Children scream for parents. Slaves run alongside masters, class forgotten in the shadow of the mountain. Inside homes, the light has disappeared. Even at midday, the interior rooms are lit only by oil lamps, flickering dimly through curtains of dust. Some families choose to hide. They shut windows, brace doors, and pray that the storm will pass. Others decide to flee, grabbing whatever valuables they can carry: coins, amulets, silverware, household gods. The air grows thicker by the minute. People press cloth to their mouths, but the ash finds its way in. Breathing becomes a struggle. For the elderly and the very young, it is almost impossible. Some collapse in the streets, coughing, unable to go on. A man helps his pregnant wife down an alley, one arm shielding her head, the other carrying a small bronze statue of Minerva. Nearby, a group of teenagers tries to climb onto the city walls, hoping for a better view, or perhaps a way out. They stop laughing when a nearby roof caves in with a deep, heavy crash. At the baths, steam mixes with volcanic dust. The air is thick and unbreathable. Water becomes cloudy with ash. Those inside stumble out, wrapped in towels, unsure whether to run or return. Farther out in the fields, some who fled early look back toward Pompeii and weep. The city is cloaked in black. The massive column of smoke towers above it like a curse. Lightning cracks within the ash cloud, painting the sky in flashes of orange and blue. It is no longer a disaster. It is a burial in progress, and Vesuvius has only begun to exhale. By mid-afternoon, Pompeii is disappearing, stone by stone, breath by breath. The ashfall no longer drifts gently. It crashes down in waves, driven by shifting winds and the mountain's furious breath. By now, over a meter of pumice covers the streets. Doors cannot open, windows cannot close. The weight of the sky has settled on the city, and it shows no sign of lifting. The roofs begin to fail. The first collapse comes at a villa near the House of the Faun. The roof gives way with a low, aching groan, then crashes inward with terrifying speed. Dust bursts outward. The home's frescoes vanish beneath rubble. Statues fall. A slave girl trapped in the atrium has no time to scream. It is not the last. All across Pompeii, walls shudder and beams snap. In a workshop, a merchant tries to shield his goods with a sheet of cloth before the upper floor caves in. In a bakery, an oven still glows faintly, but the ceiling above it sags dangerously. No one is left to feed the fire. The city grows darker. Ash clogs the oil lamps, dims their flames. The air turns gritty and bitter. It coats mouths, nostrils, and lungs. Breathing is shallow, wheezing. People now move not to escape, but to find air. Just a pocket, just a breath. The silence is broken only by the crashing of buildings, the coughing of the trapped, and the rumble of Vesuvius far above. The world has shrunk to shadows and ash. Some residents retreat underground, into storerooms and wine cellars. There they huddle in pitch darkness, hoping the stone above them will hold. Mothers wrap their arms around their children. Some clutch keys, hoping to return to homes that are already gone. Others hold nothing at all, just the hands of those they love. Outside, time slows. The ash is now knee-deep. Streets are silent. The fountains have stopped flowing. The statues of the gods are buried up to their shoulders, their marble faces streaked with soot. Pompeii is still alive, but barely. Its heart beats slower now, and above it all Mount Vesuvius continues to rumble, preparing something even worse than ash. The ash has fallen for hours now. Pompeii is half buried, suffocating, silent. Then the mountain changes. At 5:30 p.m., Mount Vesuvius gives a low, guttural roar, different from before. It is not an explosion. It is a release. Something deep inside has cracked. A moment later, the first pyroclastic surge breaks loose. It is not lava. It is worse. A dense cloud of superheated gas, ash, and pulverized rock rushes down the slope. Over 700 degrees Celsius. Faster than wind. A grey avalanche that flows like water and burns like fire. It hits the neighbouring town of Herculaneum first, swallowing it whole in under 5 minutes. People are flash-heated to death where they stand. Bodies do not fall. They are frozen upright, carbonized in an instant. Skulls fracture from the steam expanding within. The surge is so fast no one has time to run. Pompeii is still, but it can feel the change. The air, already thick with ash, grows hotter. Sulphur hangs heavy in every breath. A second tremor shakes the city. Columns tilt. A bronze statue topples with a metallic crash. Those still alive can now see the glowing red rim around the mountain. They hear the sound of boiling earth, like thunder rolling from beneath their feet. A few try to run again, but it's too late. Roads are gone. Homes are sealed. Escape is impossible. A boy clutches his father's tunic. They stand in a stairwell beneath a collapsed roof. He asks if the gods are angry. The man does not answer. He doesn't know. By 6:30 p.m., thick black clouds blot out even the faintest hint of daylight. Ash now reaches the shoulders of statues, the tops of market stalls. Fires burn in several buildings, their flames dimmed by smoke. And then silence. Brief, complete, terrifying. The first pyroclastic surge has not yet reached Pompeii, but it is close. The mountain has changed the rules. What began as ash and fear is now something else, something final. Above the rooftops, the sky glows red and pulses with lightning. The mountain is no longer a distant danger. It is a living god, and it is coming. Pompeii has hours left, maybe, but the mercy of time is fading. Darkness has swallowed Pompeii completely. There is no moon, no stars, no flame that can pierce the weight of ash in the air. Only the soft red flicker from distant fires reflects off the ash-covered walls. The city no longer breathes. It waits. Between 7 and 10 p.m., the silence becomes unbearable. Those still alive speak in whispers. Voices are hoarse from the dust. Eyes burn. Chests ache. Most have stopped trying to flee. There is nowhere to go. The gates are blocked. The sea is choked with debris. The streets are impassable, filled with hot, shifting ash that rises to the waist. In a once elegant villa near the Street of Abundance, a young woman lights a single oil lamp. She kneels beside her father, who can no longer stand. He presses a pendant into her hand, his final gift. In the garden beside them, statues of Venus and Apollo lean sideways, half buried. Elsewhere, a mother huddles beneath the stairs with her son. She hums a lullaby, trying to calm him, though her voice shakes. The boy is quiet, not because he isn't afraid, but because he is. Fear has become normal. Breathing is the only thing left to do, and even that is fading. In the stables, a dog lies twisted in its chain, claw marks deep in the ground. It had tried to free itself, but the ash came too quickly. By 8:45 p.m., tremors return, heavier, deeper. The ground groans under the weight of pressure building within the volcano. Walls buckle. Another roof caves in near the temple. Dust sprays upward. A pillar collapses into a courtyard, shattering with a final echo. People now crouch in silence. There are no more plans, no more directions, only moments. One breath, another. Pompeii's final witnesses are still. Some kneel in prayer, others lie flat, arms shielding their faces. A few hold hands, lips moving softly in darkness. No more screams, just breath and stone. At 9:50 p.m., the glow above the mountain changes, brighter, redder. The second pyroclastic surge begins to form, faster, heavier, deadlier. The final moments are here, and Pompeii, bruised and blind, does not cry out. It simply braces for whatever comes next. At 10:15 p.m., the mountain breaks. The second pyroclastic surge explodes from the flanks of Vesuvius with no warning. It is not a wave. It is a wall. A roaring mass of gas, ash, molten rock, and invisible death surges down the slopes at over 100 miles per hour. It does not burn. It vaporizes. It does not knock. It crushes. This time, it reaches Pompeii. In one terrifying moment, the entire city is engulfed. The surge races through gates, alleys, gardens, and temples, smashing everything in its path. The temperature reaches beyond 400 degrees Celsius. Wood ignites instantly. Bodies are flash-burned. No time to run. No time to think. Only stillness. People are frozen where they fell. A man reaching for his wife. A mother shielding her child. A priest with his hand still raised in prayer. The heat robs breath before the lungs can exhale. Muscles lock. Ash hardens around forms, leaving voids in the shape of final gestures. Structures collapse all at once. Ceilings fall. Walls crumble. The forum is buried beneath debris. Even marble statues begin to crack and blister from the heat. Fountains dry mid-flow, ash filling their basins like the last offering. The surge takes less than a minute to erase the city. Then, silence. A silence that does not feel like peace. It is too deep, too absolute. It is the sound of finality, of something vast and ancient completing its terrible task. The mountain groans once more, then settles. Pompeii is gone. No smoke rises from chimneys. No voices echo in the streets. No feet walk across the forum stones. The ash lies thick and still. A city perfectly preserved beneath 10 feet of volcanic dust, caught not in ruin, but in pause. The winds shift gently over the plain, carrying the last of the sulfur east. The stars return to the sky, but there is no one to see them. All that remains is shape, position, posture. the frozen choreography of people who had no time to say goodbye. And above them, Mount Vesuvius looms, quiet now, emptied of fury, crowned in steam. But deep beneath that stillness, Pompeii sleeps, waiting. Midnight passes, the eruption slows. What was once a roar has become a murmur, distant, almost tired. Vesuvius exhales smoke into the black sky, but its fire has gone. Pompeii lies beneath it now, utterly still. There are no more screams, no more footsteps, no prayers, no winds to carry them, only ash, heavy and unmoving. Beneath this blanket, the city sleeps. Temples remain standing, half-covered, their gods silenced by stone. Amphorae lie untouched in kitchens. Loaves of bread sit fossilized in ovens. Tables are still set. Coins rest in drawers beside forgotten dreams. Time has stopped, but everything has remained exactly where it was, frozen in its last heartbeat. No one comes to search, not for days, not for years. Eventually, not for centuries. Nature reclaims the region slowly. Vines creep over broken columns. The earth cools. New trees root in the ash. Grass grows where Pompeian voices once echoed. The name Pompeii fades from maps, from memory, from history. Other cities rise, empires fall. The mountain sleeps again, and then, 1700 years later, the silence breaks. In 1748, during routine excavation, workmen strike something unexpected. Painted walls, bright, delicate, preserved. They dig deeper. Rooms appear, skeletons, mosaics, streets. Pompeii begins to awaken. Historians, artists, and archaeologists come to the buried city like pilgrims. They brush ash from frescoes. They cast the empty voids left by human bodies, filling them with plaster, revealing forms caught in the moment of death. A man curled on a stair, a girl clutching her necklace, a dog straining against its chain. We do not see ruins, we see life, interrupted. Pompeii becomes more than a tragedy. It becomes a mirror, a time capsule, a reminder that joy, fear, beauty, and loss all coexist in a single breath. That a city can disappear in one night and still whisper across 2 millennia. Today, we walk the same streets. We stand in doorways where others once lived and loved. We stare into plaster faces shaped by fire and silence, and we imagine their voices. They are gone, but they are not forgotten. Because sometimes, the past is not lost. It is simply waiting. And in the quiet grey of volcanic ash, Pompeii still remembers. At the turn of the 20th century, a quiet exodus began. From Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, black families packed what little they had and moved. Some boarded northbound trains, others rode in the backs of wagons, with children asleep on bundles of clothes. They were escaping Jim Crow laws, lynchings, debt slavery, and fear. They were chasing something distant and fragile: freedom. Between 1910 and 1930, over 1.5 million black Americans left the rural South. Historians would call it the Great Migration. But for those who lived it, it was simply a chance to breathe. Cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia welcomed these new arrivals. But it was Harlem, in Upper Manhattan, that would become the brightest flame of all. Originally developed for white middle-class families, Harlem's housing boom collapsed in the early 1900s. Landlords, desperate to fill apartments, turned to the black community. What followed was a transformation. Harlem became more than a neighborhood. It became a sanctuary. Within just a few blocks, you could find doctors, tailors, shoemakers, artists, and jazz musicians. You could hear sermons and saxophones, see poetry and protest, all in the same breath. It was not an easy life. Racism did not disappear in New York. Jobs were scarce. Pay was low. But something else filled the streets. Hope. For the first time, Black people were living not in survival, but in expression. They were among their own, in a place that felt like something they had never known before. Home. Harlem became a laboratory of black life, a place where culture wasn't just preserved, it was remixed. Traditions brought from the South mingled with Caribbean rhythms, African spiritual roots, and European modernism. Voices once silenced began to sing. Ideas once ignored began to spark. And before long, Harlem wasn't just a place to live. It was a place to be seen. By the early 1920s, you could feel it. Something was blooming. Not a revolution in politics, but in art, in music, in language, in pride. A renaissance. Not just of talent, but of identity. Not just of performance, but of power. It had taken centuries of struggle to reach this moment. But in Harlem, at last, Black America began to tell its own story. Out loud. In Harlem, sound became the city's pulse, and nothing moved through its veins more powerfully than jazz. It didn't come from ivory towers or written scores. It came from front porches in New Orleans, from battered trumpets and syncopated hearts. It traveled north with the Great Migration, carried in memory and muscle, where it met Harlem's hunger for expression, and exploded. By the early 1920s, jazz wasn't just music. It was freedom set to rhythm. It bent rules. It played with time. It turned pain into melody and silence into motion. In Harlem, it echoed from open windows and spilled from basement clubs into the midnight air. On any given night, you might hear the gravel-rich voice of Bessie Smith rising from a record player in a parlor. You might pass a corner where a boy with a cornet tried to imitate Louis Armstrong. And if you were lucky enough, or wealthy enough, you might step into a velvet-lined booth at the Cotton Club and hear Duke Ellington's orchestra thunder to life. Ellington's arrangements were a universe of sound, horns that spoke like people, drums that made the floor shake, pianos that floated and pounced. His music didn't follow, it led. It made people move in ways they'd never moved before. For the first time in American history, black musicians weren't just playing music, they were defining it. Outside the spotlight, the Harlem streets pulsed with rhythm too. People danced in the Savoy Ballroom, a place where black and white New Yorkers danced side by side, a radical act in its own right. Swing, stride, blues, it all blurred into one heartbeat. But jazz wasn't just noise, it was language. A trumpet solo could shout or weep, a saxophone could seduce or mourn. It captured what words often couldn't. The complexity of black life, the joy and the ache, the rage and the pride. Even as racism and poverty pressed in, the music lifted people out. It said, "We are still here, we are still beautiful, we are still loud." And Harlem listened, not with ears only, but with its soul. While jazz poured from clubs and street corners, another revolution was happening in silence, on the page. In Harlem, words began to gather power. Young writers, poets, and thinkers took to their pens with the same energy musicians took to their instruments. But they weren't writing for applause. They were writing for truth, for memory, for justice, for voice. Langston Hughes arrived in Harlem like a rising tide. He was just a teenager when he wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers, a poem that stretched across time, tracing black identity from the Nile to the Mississippi. His poetry was simple, musical, and unafraid. He wrote of everyday people, janitors, dancers, tired mothers, dreamers, and gave their voices shape. Claude McKay's words were sharper, defiant, burning with a righteous fire. In poems like If We Must Die, he spoke directly to injustice with clenched fists and open eyes. For him, the pen was not just a tool, it was a blade. And then there was Zora Neale Hurston, a daughter of Eatonville, Florida, the first all-black town incorporated in the United States. Zora studied anthropology and captured the spoken word like no one else. She wrote the way people talked. Her stories were alive with dialect, rhythm, myth, and heat. Where others sought polish, she sought truth. Her voice was raw, real, and utterly new. Harlem's parlours became literary salons. Writers gathered late into the night, reading drafts aloud, arguing over politics and poetry. Black-owned magazines like The Crisis and Opportunity published bold new voices, voices that had once been ignored or erased. Together, they were forming something radical, a literature of black identity, unfiltered by white approval, unapologetic in tone. They weren't trying to fit in, they were trying to speak. And in every stanza, story, and essay, they answered a quiet question. What does it mean to be black in America? Sometimes the answer came as a love letter, sometimes as a shout, sometimes as a lullaby filled with longing. But always, the pen pressed forward. Because in Harlem during this Renaissance, to write was to resist. And to resist was to live with pride. The Renaissance wasn't only heard or read, it was seen. In Harlem, artists took to the canvas with purpose and power. They painted what hadn't been painted before. Black life, black beauty, black history, through black eyes. Not as subjects of study or caricature, but as creators of culture, as storytellers of their own. Aaron Douglas led the way. A quiet man with bold vision, Douglas blended African motifs with modernist style, geometric forms, layered silhouettes, radiant lines that pulsed with energy. His murals didn't just hang on walls, they told epics. From the sorrow of slavery to the pride of resistance, his art mapped the journey of a people rising. In aspects of Negro life, he captured it all. Dancers in motion, men in chains, a hand reaching upward toward light. His figures were faceless, but not nameless. They were everyone. They were ancestors. They were hope. Palmer Hayden painted the working class, barbers, fishermen, everyday people in ordinary moments. Archibald Motley brought black nightlife to vibrant life, with crowded scenes of jazz clubs, laughter, and light bouncing off polished shoes and smiling faces. Meanwhile, in darkrooms across Harlem, photographers like James Van Der Zee captured a different kind of beauty. Real beauty. His portraits showed black families dressed in their finest, newlyweds holding hands, soldiers in uniform, children standing proudly beside their parents. Van Der Zee gave Harlem its mirror, one that reflected dignity, joy, pride, and sorrow. He saw the sacred in the everyday and framed it with reverence. Visual art during the Harlem Renaissance was never just about aesthetics. It was declaration. It was correction. It was truth. Artists reclaimed their image from centuries of distortion. No longer mammies and minstrels. No longer anonymous labourers or faceless shadows. Now they were kings, queens, mothers, scholars, lovers, dancers, rebels, and saints. Every brushstroke was a protest against invisibility. Every photograph was a sentence in a story never allowed to be told. Art was no longer trapped in galleries or elite hands. It was sewn into Harlem's fabric, on church walls, in shop windows, in community centres, in the pages of magazines. The canvas was wide, and Harlem's artists filled it, not with fantasy, but with truth made visible. While jazz filled the air and poetry lit up the page, something deeper moved beneath Harlem's Renaissance, an awakening of political purpose. For centuries, black people had been told to shrink themselves, to be invisible, to survive quietly. But in Harlem, pride was becoming a public stance. And with that pride came politics, not in the form of party lines, but in the form of identity, power, and refusal. W.E.B. Du Bois, the scholar and activist, had long believed in the uplift of the talented tenth, the most educated and accomplished black individuals who could lead the way forward. He saw the Harlem Renaissance as proof that the race had greatness to offer, not someday but now. He urged artists to use their gifts not just for beauty, but for justice. He believed that art should serve a purpose, elevate the race, challenge white supremacy, and shine light on truths too long ignored. But not everyone agreed. Younger artists, like Langston Hughes, pushed back against the idea that black art had to behave. Hughes wanted freedom, to write about the poor, the struggling, the joyful, the angry. "We know we are beautiful," he wrote, "and ugly too." For him, the politics of pride was about showing all of it, the full, messy, glorious humanity of black life. Then came Marcus Garvey. Where Du Bois focused on integration and uplift, Garvey dreamed of independence. Through his movement, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, he preached self-reliance, economic strength, and a return to African roots. Garvey's message resonated. His parades filled the streets. His red, black, and green flag became a symbol of global black identity. He spoke of ships, of black-owned industry, of shaking free from systems that would never accept them. Together, these voices, Du Bois, Hughes, Garvey, and countless others, didn't always agree. But they created a chorus. And in Harlem, that chorus was loud, brilliant, and unignorable. Because the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just a cultural movement, it was a political one. A movement that didn't ask for a seat at the table, it built its own. And beneath every note, every brushstroke, every word written by candlelight was a steady, rising drumbeat. We exist. We matter. We are. In the spotlight of Harlem's stage, a new kind of woman stood tall, brilliant, bold, and unafraid. She was more than a muse or a background character. She was a scholar, a singer, a sculptor, a storyteller. She didn't ask to be included. She declared her presence, and in doing so, she helped shape the Renaissance itself. Zora Neale Hurston was one of its brightest flames, a folklorist, novelist, and unapologetic voice of the rural South. Zora brought black dialect, myth, and rhythm into literature with fearless clarity. Where others reached for polish, she reached for truth. Her characters spoke like the people she grew up with. They sang, they laughed, they fought, and they lived. In their eyes were watching God. She gave readers a heroine who found her voice not through love, but through loss, through land, through herself. Zora studied anthropology at Barnard College, the only black student there. She travelled the South, recording songs, traditions, and stories that had never been written down. She treated black culture not as a curiosity, but as a legacy, one to be honoured, one to be preserved. She wasn't alone. In Paris, Josephine Baker electrified European audiences. Barefoot and fierce, she danced with joy and rebellion. Her performances were playful and political, mocking the very stereotypes others tried to impose. Offstage, she became a spy during World War II, smuggling secrets for the French resistance. Back in the States, women like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith gave voice to pain, pleasure, and power through the blues. Their lyrics were raw. Their presence was undeniable. They sang not for approval, but for release, for themselves and every woman who had loved hard and lived harder. Women of the Harlem Renaissance also organized. They led clubs, published essays, hosted salons. They fought for women's rights while confronting racism within the broader feminist movement. They carved their own path through art and activism alike. These women were not accessories to the Renaissance. They were architects of it. They redefined what it meant to be black and female, unbound, unfiltered, and unashamed. And in every word, every note, every painted line, they left a message echoing through time. I will not be silenced. I am the story too. When the sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline and the street lamps flickered on, Harlem transformed. By day, it was a city of workers and thinkers, families and artists. But by night, Harlem came alive in a different way, a rhythm that pulsed beneath the surface, in smoke-filled clubs, crowded ballrooms, and late-night whispers. The music didn't stop when darkness fell. It got louder, bolder, sweatier. The Cotton Club was one of the most famous venues, lavish, glittering, and segregated. White patrons sat in tuxedos and pearls, sipping gin while black performers gave them the night of their lives. Duke Ellington ruled the stage, his fingers commanding every key. Dancers flew across the floor like lightning. Voices rose over brass and beat. The irony was sharp. Black bodies on the stage, banned from the seats. But the performers owned the room in their own way. They dazzled. They dominated. They created something so magnetic that even racism couldn't look away. Elsewhere, the Savoy Ballroom told a different story. It was the people's place. No velvet rope, no segregation. Here, black and white dancers mingled freely. Lindy hoppers spun in wide circles, skirts twirling, shoes sliding. The floor was alive with joy. The music was louder here, rawer, closer to the ground. Beyond the dance halls, Harlem's nightlife included back-alley speakeasies, upstairs jazz dens, and apartment gatherings where strangers became friends over records and wine. These weren't just parties. They were performances, rituals of release. In a world that tried to keep black people quiet, Harlem at night was a place to laugh loudly, move freely, and claim space. Writers came too. Langston Hughes scribbling poems on napkins, musicians trading verses between sets, painters sketched by candlelight, philosophers debated over bourbon and smoke. Every evening held the promise of art being born in real time. But Harlem's nights weren't just glitter and music. They also revealed tensions between fame and exploitation, celebration and survival. There were performers paid pennies for brilliance, dancers who worked until dawn, then woke at noon to clean hotel rooms. Behind the glamour was grit. Still, something electric lived in those hours. Something that said, "We are alive, we are brilliant, we will shine, especially when the world goes dark." And shine they did. In Harlem, even getting dressed was an act of defiance. Every collar, every hat tilt, every flash of color was more than fashion. It was statement. Style wasn't just about beauty, it was about power. About being seen in a world that tried to make black people invisible. Men wore zoot suits, broad shoulders, high waists, long jackets that flowed when they walked. It wasn't subtle. That was the point. These were clothes that took up space. That said, "I belong here." Shoes were polished to mirrors, hats angled just right. Even the strut down Lenox Avenue carried intention, a rhythm all its own. Women embraced elegance and boldness. Bright lipsticks, silk blouses, tailored dresses with intricate beadwork. Hair was sculpted, straightened, curled. Some wore head wraps, others let their natural curls shine. Style was a personal canvas, where tradition met modernity. And whether they worked in clubs or cleaned houses by day, Harlem women walked the streets with heads high and hips swinging. But it went deeper than clothing. Language became art. Slang, dialect, code switching, all were tools of resistance. Young people invented new ways of speaking, twisting words with wit, rhythm, and soul. They didn't just adapt English, they reimagined it. Whether in the cadence of a poem or the snap of conversation, every syllable was layered with history and pride. Even silence had its power. A raised eyebrow, a paused breath, a hand placed firmly on a hip. These too were part of the performance, non-verbal declarations that said, "You may overlook me, but I see myself clearly." In beauty salons and barbershops, community temples in their own right, style was passed down, shared, sharpened. One person's swagger lifted another's confidence. One woman's bright scarf became the spark for a dozen others to wear theirs with pride. Harlem's style travelled. It rippled into Chicago, Detroit, London, and Paris. It influenced painters, photographers, and filmmakers. It whispered into the threads of future revolutions. Because to dress beautifully in a country that denied your worth was more than vanity. It was protest. To walk with confidence was political. To show joy was resistance. And in every feather, every heel, every flash of gold, Harlem reminded the world, we are not hiding. We are dazzling. By the early 1930s, the Renaissance began to dim. The Great Depression tightened its grip, silencing nightclubs, scattering artists and draining the lifeblood from Harlem's cultural economy. Funding dried up, publishers backed away, the glamorous shine faded under the weight of poverty and hardship. But the flame didn't die. It changed shape. What had begun in brownstone basements and candlelit salons now lived in memory, in literature, in music passed from hand to hand. The Harlem Renaissance had planted seeds, deep, stubborn, and glowing beneath the surface of American life. Its writers became mentors. Its musicians became legends. Its painters became history's mirrors. And its message, of dignity, expression, resistance, and pride, never left. The poets of the Renaissance whispered through the verses of the Civil Rights era. You can hear Langston Hughes in the words of Maya Angelou, in the cadence of Nikki Giovanni. You can feel the defiance of Claude McKay in the speeches of Malcolm X and the rhythms of Gil Scott-Heron. The style, the music, the energy, it echoed in Motown, in soul, in jazz clubs and hip-hop ciphers. It danced across the stages of Broadway and spoke boldly from pages taught in classrooms across the world. Even today, Harlem remains a sacred space, a monument not of marble, but of memory. Walking through its streets is like walking through time. The Apollo Theatre still stands, echoing with generations of voices. Murals, bookstores, and community gardens carry on the creative spark. The Renaissance proved something that no system, no prejudice, no silence could erase. That black life in America is not something to pity or fear, but something to celebrate. It showed the world the power of culture to shape history, and it reminded a people long denied their voice that their voice was the story, not a side note, not a footnote, the story. So as the night draws in and the music softens in the background, remember this: the Harlem Renaissance was not a moment, it was a declaration. And that declaration still echoes in every bold word, in every proud step, in every new creation born from truth. Because Harlem didn't just create a renaissance, it created a legacy, and that legacy lives on, in all of us.